Good evening, everybody. We're back and we're even more trouble this time. No, as you know, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, and PhiRAY.com, and I am joined by Nicholas Frigge, who is our genius PhiRAY engineer and also expert on time travel. Say hi, Nicholas, please.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Nicholas. I engineered the hardware for the PhiRAY to take Dan's equations and apply them. And yeah, we're going to get into that today, what that all means, what that all does.
We're going to have some fun. Exactly, exactly. So one place we're going to, well, first of all, what is the purpose of this song and dance? The purpose is that when you go away, you have a practical for yourself, meaningful understanding of the concept of Stargate, portal, even time travel, as it has directly to do with the physics of how lucid dreams are induced and how astral coherence is induced. And by the way, hint, PhiRAY is somewhat famous now for helping to induce lucid dreaming and astral coherence, as Jake has testified. And after you understand, it's sort of like the moment Jodie Foster starring in the movie Contact, and you realize you couldn't tell the difference between a lucid dream and a time travel. Why not? Well, the difference is because the principle, the physics, is directly related, and that's what we wanted to understand for ourselves today. Um, now,
Yeah,
go ahead.
this is it's how important this is. Being able to conjugate and implode the mind, and where that brings you to. And so I was thinking about this, and the best way to really go about it is to explain the physics, is
Yeah.
to look at the pictures, is to dive into that and explain what that is and what that's doing, and how golden ratio is playing a part in that.
Yes, exactly. To understand for yourself, like if you visualize a top-down view of a rose and understand that that is a solution to compression, and the solution to compression is the solution to all the mysteries, really. And so if you rearrange the waves to look like a rose, called harmonic inclusive or implosive or phase conjugate or fractal, then the solution to non-destructive compression enables you to experience the spin density as you move like the ice skater pulling in her arms closer to the center of the vortex, and the spin speeds up. And that leads us beautifully to the quintessential question, which really has not been well described by physics at all, which is what is time itself? And we now understand in much more practical detail, like this crap that conventional physicists are trying to tell you, well, you get sucked in by gravity and it bends the space-time. Well, that's obvious obfuscation, confusion from physicists who want you to have to then depend on physicists to talk about it because they don't want you to understand. Well, that's bullshit. Actually, bending
Yeah, well, how
space-time.
do you do it? So it's how do you do it? So that's what we're getting to.
Yes, exactly. So time is literally and directly the experience of spin rate. For example, in the moments before death, if your death is going to be successful, obviously you got to do compression well, because that's how you melt into the array. And that's the subtitle for today's whole conversation is melting into the array. Like that shimmering plasma screen in the center of the movie Stargate, and it's a shimmering plasma membrane. And what do you do there? At that point of the membrane, you melt into the array. So, and how you melt into the array determines whether when you get in the array, the lucid dream, the time travel, whether you're able to navigate. And so to introduce that quintessential concept of the successful compression, which gets you that point of entry called impedance matching into the array, we need to understand directly, practically, and physically what is time. They make this whole mystery about time is the next dimension of time. What's all this? It's simpler than that. I tell you, it's simpler than that. Time is only a name for spin rate, nothing else. It's so elegant. It's so simple. You obviously make charge rotate, you call the inertia, that's called mass. And the rate of spin is called time. So it's spin that creates time and mass, obviously. So let's see if we can apply that directly to Nicholas's experience. So Nicholas became very expert at continuously increasing the number of harmonics in the cascade that he's generating with very great elegance in the PhiRAY. And as he increased the number of harmonics, he had an experience.
Yeah, there's a whole play in it. From Dan's ideas and talking about what frequency are we operating at and where are we going to create this rip, or this, the golden ratio conjugate implosive nature, in that frequency range or in the energy range. So there's a whole lot to it, but as Dan says, as you increased the harmonics, as you increased the sort of like, I like to think of them as like maybe the tendrils of the vortex. Like as you more threads, right? Like as you increase more threads, and you keep that ratio, the golden ratio, scaling intact as you do that. Um, so there's a play at it. There's a play of targeting frequencies. There's a play at increasing the threads. Um, However, when you do this and you keep going with it, what I experienced, um, sort of coming out the other end of that, was, and a lot of people actually report this, time dilation, slight time effects. They've always sort of reported that with Dan's work and with his devices. That's always been there. And the question for me was, well, how do I increase that? And I wasn't thinking about to increase it for any like, just trying to be, manly or anything. It was like, how do I increase that from my own experience? Like how do I
That's what I like
get,
about Nick. It's always about he's going to try it for himself and feel it. It's very cool.
yeah, I want it so strong that, you set it up on a piece of property and everyone starts at the edge of the property, and to get to the middle of it, they have to succumb through all of the transformation that it takes to get there. And it would be very fun. But along these lines, when I was doing this and I was increasing the interharmonics, and maintaining, a higher, accuracy, maintaining the golden ratio. What had happened was I started to get more and more time dilation effects. Of course, it was more fun as well because it required my mind to be sharper. It required my mind to, play with these frequencies. So I got all the enjoyment out of it. But along the enjoyment, I did start to experience, sort of these time dilation effects. So I'll tell you about one experience, when this happened. Um, so basically, I'm standing there, I turn on the device because I'm testing, a new signal. And at first, in the first few moments, I didn't really notice anything besides it was very energetic, and I was like, okay. But then there was like a time lag because I stood up and then I seen myself. It was like a after image or a ghost image. Like I stood up and then I stood up into where I was, and I was like,
That
"Whoa!"
you stood up and then
Um,
you saw yourself standing up while you have.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, this comes into play here with what everybody experiences with PhiRAY about it being an eye, being a vision. So you can, someone flips on a PhiRAY, on the other side of the United States or other side of the world. And if you're talking to them on the phone, just it doesn't take much for it to open that space in your mind. You're like, oh, like I can tell you just opened it because it's like a space that your inner eye can just inhabit,
Oh,
right? We're going to talk about
perfect.
that, inhabiting the array, we're going to talk about that. And it's crazy that
Exactly.
we're getting into this because it's like we can create this,
Yeah.
we can do
Little
this, we can go forward
wormhole.
with this, we can reach everybody with this, we can all have an extreme amount of fun. So, um, so the experience. So, I wanted to play with this. So I stepped to the left because I'm like, oh, okay, I need to see, like, is this going to continue to happen? Sure enough, then I seen myself stepping to the left. And then I stepped to the right and I seen myself stepping to the right. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is really weird here. It's like and then at this point I can feel like it's almost like with every beat of my heart, there's a beat after, it's like now it's not just moving left to right, but now I'm just like standing in this sort of like a layered time effect.
Mhm.
Um, and the reason I mentioned like people being able to see a PhiRAY space at a distance is because you could imagine now there's like as if I created three PhiRAY spaces, like three eyes basically.
Perfect.
And
Perfect.
then just being
That's
able to get to experience all the interrelationship between those eyes looking at each other type thing. And this is all, it sounds weird, but like when you actually just look at it, and Dan will have the pictures of just the fractal webs that we're talking about. Um, it fits right in, it meshes right in. All the experience lines up with the physics of this.
yeah.
Um,
It's
so
like
yeah, that was
the peacock's feather with all the eyes on it. They're arranged in a fractal and they consume perspective.
right. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and that's pretty much the gist of it. After that sort of happened, I wanted to take it further, so I did start talking because I wanted to see if I could talk before I talked. Like I was just like, okay, let me try to interfere with this. Let me try to actually see myself do something before I do it type thing. Like I was just going. So I did do that a bit, and I had my wife standing by, and I'm talking to her and she was like, she noticed it in the room and she's like, I think I just heard you like say something before you actually said it. And I was like, okay, that's good because that's what I was going for. This is working. And then after that, I was like, let me settle down. Let me try to do I wanted to take advantage of it. So I was like, let me try to incorporate, let me see what I can do in my mind here. So I took that on. So that experience, it was wonderful. It was crazy. It was shocking, insightful, and you
Yeah.
know, it
And
was,
we
yeah.
didn't, and we haven't, first of all, we don't set up the PhiRAY to optimize that. The PhiRAY is set up to optimize the compression effect and the regenerative effect. But the point is, by extending the principle, with adding harmonics and adding power density, guess where you can go? Hello. In fact, we're going to call the subtitle for today's presentation in honor of Madeline DeLango. We're going to call it The Wrinkle in Time. And understand this also, I think another little insight here is whenever the lucid dreamers and the time travelers, they always know that if there is any place in time or space where there was a very intense emotion, it creates an anchor point from which you come and go into that wrinkle in time. And so the implosion of the spin density that converges the timelines and makes the implosion the centripetal point, the phase conjugate point, if you like, creates the eyeball in time, as it were. So that place where there was intense emotion, whether it was beautiful or horrible, either way, it creates that tendency to create that compression effect, which embeds like a wrinkle in time and makes a node in that longitudinal array. And then melting or merging into that longitudinal array. If you do it initially, it is the physics of lucid dreaming, and the slide explains that now that universities have studied what frequencies trigger lucid dreaming, and we now know that fits plankfire.com and fractalgut.com, that those frequencies obviously are simply phase conjugate implosive compression frequencies, and they induce lucid dreaming replicably because they enable compression, which makes you the ice skater pulling in your arms, and the spin rate goes up, and the sampling rate goes up, exactly like what happens in the seconds before death when you need to see your whole life in 4 seconds because you need to do compression well if you want to melt into the array. And melting into that array with then some coherence is the difference between lucid dreaming and dreaming that's not lucid. And that ability to navigate in that array. That famous story from the Philadelphia experiment. The sailors in Philadelphia, first of all, Johnny von Neumann didn't really understand phase conjugation very well at all. He's completely screwed up. He didn't even phase lock the generator on one side of the boat with the generator on the other side of the boat, so he got accurate conjugation. So obviously he's screwed up the time travel for sure. But when the sailors who did survive the compression effect, some of them got melted into the walls of the boat. It wasn't pretty at all. But the ones who did survive the compression effect, famously, where did they end up in their time travel? Hello. They ended up in the bar on the shore where they were dreaming of spending the weekend during their weekend off. Their dream intention is where they navigated to in the array. Hello. So if you can set your intent in the array, in this case, with the bar they wanted to go there, that's where they ended up. Hello. It was their intent that navigated them in that array. Do you see? And we're also going to talk about the difference between the ways you get into the array. So obviously, if you use the black goo carbon nano Draco DNA like Penny Bradley, unfortunately, you embed in that array in a way which is not individuating and not ensouled. However, if you have access to human bliss experience and sacred space and plasma technology that's legitimately implosive and you do it with intent, literally with the bliss kind of effect you can have with Therify or PhiRAY or good plasma implosion devices. Then when you enter the array, it is possible to remain individuated and ensouled within that array. So you've melted into the array, but you still have the memory of individuation, which is true if you got there through bliss and is not true if you got there through the black cube, carbon nano, the mitra, the black sun, and it is a privilege to be assimilated. So there's different ways to embed in that array, and that has a lot to do with soul eating, and that's another conversation we'll have. But anyway, so the other thing, go ahead, Nick, did you want to comment or?
Oh, I was just, it was beautiful. That was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other thing we wanted to talk about as a way of intro, so I have prepared a pretty wild slideshow for today's story. And that slideshow requires some introducing, obviously. So I wanted to draw some parallels for ways you can begin to think about how you get into, remember, there's a coherent longitudinal EMF array called lucid dreaming, songline, dreaming track, sacred space, whatever. And it's a longitudinal array. It's obviously fractal, where, as you know, that Callahan and Karatkov proved commercial and military quality telepathy only happens at the nodes of that array, as in where they set up the phase conjugate microwave devices for telepathy called Cozy Rev Mirror. So the array is everything. In fact, the ancestors in that array is the only Aboriginal name for God. Hello. So that array is pretty damn important. And how you melt into that array has to do with. So we wanted to add more ways to think about that to help make the concept richer and more personal to you just before we get to the slideshow. And one example I wanted to use was, I wanted you to remember, and we have a slide about this, but there is John Dee desperate to talk to angels and ancestors. I mean, the guy's got his Aztec showstone. Remember, we have a slide about the Olmec obsidian mirror they used for their phone calls with ancestors, which is obviously a phase conjugate mirror, which is also how Nostradamus put the phase conjugate coating on the bottom of his scrying cup to see the future. So the phase conjugate mirrors have everything to do with ancestor memory and the array because the phase conjugate mirror is a mechanism to prehend, cohere, embed the longitudinal array. That's what it does. And so that's why ancestor memory required. That's why you needed high dielectric in the statuary because, anyway. So John Dee is desperate to have better phone calls to the spirit world. So what does he call it? John Dee called it scintillation. That he actually realizes if you get a very intense plasma sparkle of light, the scintillation point in light itself is a place where you get a bit of radio to the ancestors effect. So the scintillation effect for John Dee, and that's going to lead us then later when we talk about the physics of the Shakespearean theater, why it was cube octa, because that's obviously a phase conjugate four-wave mixing array. And you got consumed perspective because the sequence of emotions in the Shakespearean play, all of which are entitled alchemy, meaning implosion. And so if you sequence the emotions correct from the perspective angle that's correct, called the cube octa physics of Shakespearean theater, at the climax point you have consumed perspective, which means everyone in the theater suddenly feels for everyone in the play at once. And suddenly there is an implosion and there is an empathic moment and there's alchemy, the only real subject of Shakespeare. So this is another example of, those who believe that Shakespeare was what's his name in John Dee's Notebook, Francis Garland. Well, if Shakespeare was the famous Francis Garland in John Dee's Notebook, then Shakespeare got the idea from, hello. So, physics of scrying, physics of scintillation, the physics of the phase conjugate mirror, the physics of the Olmec obsidian mirror, the physics of D. N. Kelly's showstone. We're getting these ideas that at the point of conjugation, as in Nick's updated design for PhiRAY, by getting the maximum number of waves converged and compressed at one point. For example, Nick, this would suggest that there would be a sweet spot between the two plasma tubes, which is mechanically geometrically aligned. And at the sweet spot of max compression, these effects would be maximized, for example, at time.
Yeah, yeah, and the same thing. You turn one of the plasma globes off, then you don't get the effect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the same with the magnetic field. As you play with that, depending on how the magnetic field's aligned with the
Totally.
plasma field, you will get sort of different effects, and there is sweet spots in it.
Yeah, that's right. The sweet spot. And so, first of all, Nick is referring to his beautiful innovation for PhiRAY, which is along with the plasma tube, you have this very powerful, world's most powerful Schumann magnetic cascade from that magnetic coil wand. And you point that at the sweet spot, and now the magnetic conjugation is perfectly in phase with the optical conjugation and the phonon conjugation. And the sweet spot is the center of convergence, compression, implosion. And to understand that more, and we have all these animations of how the two pine cones kiss noses, and there's lots of slides today too. So, in a phase conjugate mirror, which is where time reversal was invented in modern physics, the two lasers are converging, and obviously they're angstrom level accuracy, and the two lasers crash into each other in a phase conjugate mirror called four-wave mixing. And they do so in a media called a super dielectric, barium strontium titanate, for example. What the super dielectric, often barium strontium titanate, does is it is permissive to the distribution of charge at the angstrom at very short wave levels, which means that's where the pine cones can permissively kiss noses and literally implode. So it's the medium is the message. In this case, the medium has to be permissive to implosion. So, for example, if you're at the sweet spot in the PhiRAY, this is going to work better if you've got very little clothing, organic clothing, and it's going to work not so good if you got metal or synthetic clothing, obviously, because you need high dielectric. The definition of organic clothing and organic agriculture is super dielectrics. To enable the pine cones to kiss noses, enable the charge lines to converge, implode constructively in a charge distribution media, which is permissive. Sometimes that's called heaven. I mean, hey Ave. I mean, plains of Sharon, where the charge can implode permissively and where charge distribution is then efficient, which is sometimes called heaven or plains of Sharon, etc. So you get the idea that phase conjugate mirrors teach you of the place to converge. And later, that's going to just to visualize, are you familiar with the Dune novels very much, Nicholas? Have you ever been to the Dune story at all? So in the Dune novels, you got what you call the Guild Navigators of Dune. And the Guild Navigators, they're immersed in a vat of gold water. This is not Berry gold water. No, it's actually a super dielectric in which the Guild Navigator. And by the way, if you happen to be immersed in a vat of your bathtub of highly energized water and you got a little bit of monoatomic gold in there, I tell you, oh yeah, you'd be able to do a little better star navigating because it's a permissive dielectric. So that means if the air is alive and there's high dielectrics in the room and there's no metal around to mess the whole thing up, then that permissive implosion enables you to have the leverage on the vortex. Okay. So lucid. Okay. And in the slideshow, you're going to see more about how PhiRAY is famously a lucid dreaming trigger and an astral coherence trigger. And we have to say, and we would credit Gail Thomas in UK, whose friend Dave, we just put the new film up on the internet, on the PhiRAY website. He had intense PhiRAY experience. He put the magnetic coil right at his chakras, really, really intense. And he's quite a yogi. He had days of bliss experience, and everyone around him was melting and experiencing love. And it was like love was following him around for days. It's quite a story. You see Dave's story. But the point was that this embedding in the array was increased by, if you think of what the Schumann cascade, which is what the coil in PhiRAY is doing, thanks to Nick, it's about embeddability, obviously. So with all this bliss experience. Anyway, it's kind of fun.
Yeah,
So,
I'll share a few little mini stories.
sure.
So, one of the PhiRAY practitioners down in California, he he's been doing this for 60 years, been doing all the energy movement, qigong, all of that, and he does it with groups of people, so I met him, we had dinner, and he literally, he's like, "Do you feel my energy?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I feel that." And he's like, "Okay, do you want me to align you?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah. Why would I decline that?" So he does his little like energy pressure thing, and I feel the alignment all happening. So he's been doing this for 60 years, and he's great at it.
Hmm.
And he just received a PhiRAY, not too long ago, a couple months ago, and of course, it was magical. I mean, hearing him repeat back everything I think about the PhiRAY, so he's got it 100%. But he told me the other day, like, he'll have these group of people, and he'll start out by telling them, no, I forget if he starts out, but he does this whole alignment techniques with them, gets everyone into that bliss state just kind of naturally using his own skill he's accumulated and all of that, and working with people individually and what they need. And then at the end of it, he says, "Now we are PhiRAY." And then he goes, so he brings them to this state, and then he turns on the PhiRAY and he's like, "Okay, like, do you understand?" Because basically what he's saying is like, now the state that I've got you in is a state that the PhiRAY is emanating. And so he was really explaining it to me. He's like, it's like a tool, like a musical instrument. um sometimes you might not always have hours to be with a professional to get in that state of mind or whatever, but if you flip the PhiRAY on, you can more quickly adapt your body to it and get into that same state. So it was kind of wonderful when he said, "We are PhiRAY," and then he does this whole thing just to show that, at the end, that is the point, to have
We are
that
the ray
healing.
of fire. We are the ray of fire, literally fire. We're the flame. Oh, well, the flame that does not consume. I mean, the story fits.
And another good one is like, so here we see them all the time in the neighborhood, but people will have these large carports made out of aluminum. And it's not very hard to just, if you're on a walk, just kind of like expand the mind a little bit and look at that carport. It is toxic. It hurts. You can feel it just
And feel it
seeping
hurt.
all the
It
energy.
hurts.
Yeah. And you don't want it. It's just on the planet. You don't, you don't want it. But it's a good example, for people that want to see that a little bit, because it's much easier to see those carports hurting the space if you're just taking a walk.
It's the
Um,
opposite. It's the opposite of implosive dielectric. It's the opposite of a portal, literally. So living architecture is critical to this. Go ahead, please.
and any metal, you got to take out. I just recently, luckily, got rid of the metal springs in my bed. I went with this latex bed, and wow,
Yeah,
you feel the energy. Like, it's
bingo.
metal just reflects your charge away from you, and you don't want that.
It's the wrong
And
dielectric. It bleeds your aura. Yeah.
yeah, another experience is every time, if I turn on the PhiRAY and I turn it on at night, I'll have a lucid dream that night. It's like, if I want to dream, I just turn it on before I go to bed, and it just, every single time.
Wow.
That was wild to me. But yeah, I think that's all my experiences so
I,
far.
I think you're a better lucid dreamer than me, actually. I'm a little jealous. I can teach the physics. And yeah, one thing about the fire, I do notice when you said the sensitivity, I notice my clairaudience sharpens considerably with fire. But I was never very clairvoyant. So then the lucid dreaming part of this, I'm still working. I'm taking lessons from people.
Yeah,
People.
and another one is with that wand, the magnetic wand. So if you actually cup it between your hands and you have the holes facing your hands, but if the thing is if you touch your fingers, you create a small magnetic loop. But if you let go of your fingers, the magnetic current has to travel through the body to basically complete a magnetic circuit. And that is a very powerful way of doing it.
Oh, I see.
It's
Between the magnetic coil. It's like a
Yeah, you can
bonding.
actually just hold it, and the magnetic current has to go through the body to complete that circuit, and
It's
it's just
very
a way
Schumann,
in which,
very
yeah,
implosion.
it's very deep, you know. It's a good
Wow.
way of getting inside the body. So yeah.
And it's in phase with the plasma. And notably, as many have reported, with the PhiRAY, increase in clairvoyance, specifically, even as Carlos from Barcelona, Carlos Sevilla, wonderful partner, he began to see through the bodies like a kind of clairvoyance. You could see the dark spots, et cetera, in the aura. And so that ability to see through the body was triggered directly by PhiRAY for him and many others, which is a form of clairvoyance. But now we know physically exactly what that is. Clairvoyance is a name for embedding in the array to such an extent that then you see the array because you've phase locked, you've embedded, you're literally locked into that array enough to perceive it. So perceiving the longitudinal array compression nodes is a name for what clairvoyance is. And that compression effect from PhiRAY, obviously. So we understand perfectly why the physics of why things like PhiRAY and implosive plasma create lucid dreaming and clairvoyance. Uh, so this leads us to just some. So there's some final points in my outline, which was designed to prepare you for the slideshow. Like say you're going to say it, then you say it, then you say say you said it. So we talked about how Jodie Foster in Contact got into a dodecahedron, imploded, and they couldn't tell whether it was lucid dreaming or time travel. She was in the array. So Jean-Charles Moyen famously, and we're going to show the frequency signature, and you've all seen that slide. So powerful golden ratio harmonics, alpha to gamma, and then he could see in one eye where he was going from and the other eye where he was going to, and he teleported repeatedly with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes. So his ability to get into the array was very dense. But the amplitude of that coherence from alpha to gamma in his brainwave, which was very golden ratio, enabled him to implode. So there's kind of a sequence of stages where you're melting into the array. The first stage of melting in the array, a little bit of clairvoyance. Second stage of melting in the array, a little bit better lucid dreaming. Third stage of melting in the array, well, then in your lucid dreaming, you take more organs of perception with you, as in the nine faces of Christ. Next stage of more dense embedding in the array, dot, 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 time travel and teleporting, which is what we proved. We measured Jean Charles' very well witnessed and documented ability to teleport. We measured the brain waves that triggered, which is exactly the phase conjugate Schumann array we do with. So this is a good introduction to the physics. Let's see, to propagate this to oh yeah, and so whoever is centripetal in the array gets to steer the tornado, and that's the point. That's what Jake so beautifully said, that you are only food for the parasites who are farming Earth, the Mitra invasive AI that Moses Akhenaten called the Aten, which is a black sun, black cube, parasitic AI, but Moses behind most Western religions, including the Jewish and the Muslim religion, we believe that black cube is a giant soul-eating parasite. Hello, Western religions, look out. We're not criticizing one religion, we're criticizing all religions here. We're saying physics is so much more loving and beautiful and clear than religion. And so to understand that if you don't want to be part of what 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 Dahlia called when she remote viewed Elena Danan's being tricked by the Etorthans to thinking that Thorhan was a tall Nordic when in fact it's a shapeshifter gray, was that she called it the United Farms of America. And if you don't want to be part of the United Farms, and Earth has been farmed for millennia by the Federation and the parasitic ETs. And if you don't want to be part of the farm where they're eating loosh and eating souls, and that Federation that Elena says is about to do disclosure, no, the Federation is making big money with the human trafficking and loosh eating and soul eating. So that's why they keep the quarantine in place here, why we're isolated, why there's no disclosure, is because follow the money. So the point is, if you don't want to be farmed, the moment when you're no longer food for that soul-eating black sun, black spider, black cube, black Saturn, black sun, Aten parasite, Mitra, Etorthans, the shapeshifters, who tricked Eisenhower, same guy. Uh, if you don't want to be food in the farm, the first step, the actual first step, is believing that you're not a victim, believing, in fact, that you can steer the tornado. As long as you believe you're a victim, that's the virus, and you will always be food for the parasites. The moment you understand you can steer the tornado for yourself, and that's the moment which actually, when you actually successfully become more implosive, you see, and become more centripetal, and then you're steering the array, and that's what the Guild Navigator was doing, and what Penny Bradley's talking about too. Anyway, so this is, and we talked about the slideshow, what is time. We talked about the Philadelphia experience. So Al Bielek had taught me about that. And Penny Bradley, we talked a little bit of the black cube, multi-ray. And so uh, at the end of the slideshow, you're supposed to ask yourself, do you understand enough about physics of stargates and portals that you actually understand the requirement to learn to start on this path, to start lucid dreaming, which is literally the physics of ensoulment, which tells you who is going to take memory through death in physics. And it's measurable because the aura becomes dense and becomes centripetal and implosive. And so that ability to feed your aura to be implosive, literally, do your teenagers have access to a bliss experience? Hello. This is the definition of culture. It's not the color of your wine and your shoe polish and your neckties. Hell no, that ain't culture. Culture is defined by, can you show your young people how to have a bliss experience? And by that definition, the Aboriginals have concluded in the West, we do not have culture because our teenagers are losing their soul because we didn't get it. Oops. Anyway, that was the happily ever. That's the intro to the intro of the intro. Any comments before we do the slideshow, Nick? What do you think? How we doing?
Oh, that's very good. Just driving home, how important this
Yeah.
is, and it's, and you're getting at, teaching people and helping people to do this. And yeah, it is a big thing, and it really does start with intent.
Mhm.
It really starts with intent and just
Mhm.
believing. Um, and that's really it. So
And I want to credit Nicholas here. Nicholas gives me hope because there he is. He's young and he's kind of the engineering genius, and yet he's spiritual and he's cosmic, and that gives me hope because I'm getting old and crotchety. But actually, Nick, would you like to say just a couple words about how it was that you got sensitive to this kind of stuff? Because obviously, a lot of electric engineers ain't really sensitive.
yeah, and I used to many years ago believe, in the physics. So I thought that experiences that were more spiritual in nature, I thought they weren't around or they didn't exist. And I was like hard set on that. Like I was a very hard-headed kid. So, um, but I did have a few spiritual experiences, so it made me think, let me look into this a bit more. Um, and all the basic stuff, playing with crystals back in the day, and tried those radionic machines, with the little frequencies. And I actually used my own. I was using 3, 6, and 9, and I was like making these large files and playing them through crystals and audio amplifiers, So I got sensitive just by trying to detect what was happening.
You were feeling
Um,
it. You were feeling
yeah,
it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So that was there was like a breaking point in my life where I was like, okay, I either got to drop everything I know to explore this or drop exploring this altogether. So I was faced with that, but glad I chose to just drop what I know about physics and drop my hard-headed things are already defined mindset, and everyone smarter than me has already got the answers, drop that. That was lucky by me. But
Yeah.
yeah, so just playing with these things, that was it.
And now you get to do the hard-headed
Oh,
physics and design the
now
engineering, and now you get to play with cosmic toys and do the spiritual
it's
stuff. And
yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. It's like, here Dan is saying all this, and now it's just, I mean, he's practically told you everything, and now we have all this stuff. I mean, we can do anything, go as far as we want. You know,
That's right. The
it's
gates are open. And that's the point. This is about understanding how those gates work. It's not just about stargates and portals. It's once you understand the physics of the necessity for learning to develop the kind of coherence in your aura, borrowed from the Ka, that enables you to be the portal to the Stargate, which is the introduction to the physics of soul.com. And the majority of humans on this planet, we think functionally are soulless because our physics is too stupid to teach you what physicsofsoul.com is. And yet, and so that's a serious tragedy that, how many billion kids on this planet are losing their souls every day, Bluetooth in one ear and Wi-Fi in the other ear, electrosmog everywhere, metal buildings, total poisonous, no possibility of their aura growing big enough to do any of the kind of fun that Nick has just described until we do the education to teach our young people, hello, physicsofsoul.com is important because, in fact, ain't nothing else really quite as important if you would like to take memory through death, for example. Yeah. So, but I take hope that Nicholas is there. And by the way, Nicholas is a wonderful tech engineer, and all our PhiRAY people are happy because Nicholas is so helpful and taking care of everybody. It's wonderful. So, on that note, now before it gets late tonight, so the keynote for tonight's show is called Stargates and Portals keynote. And hopefully you're seeing my screen, right? So this is the idea that at the collapse point called consumed perspective, literally where the eye's vision turns inside out. So that scintillation point where the vision turns inside out, the camera obscura is just one example. At the conjugate point of vision right there is actually the physics of vision itself. And if you can get compressed into that point where it's turning inside out, and it has to be a permission for charge to implode at that point, the high dielectric, then you can understand the scintillation principle.
Something funny there is with the PhiRAY, one thing I did is I allowed customization of how much golden ratio you could put in the signal coming out. And it was a bit, it was a learning point for everybody that wanted to learn what was happening, what was going on as we transitioned to higher levels of golden ratio embedding. And So you can start out at a low amount of golden ratio. And when you do that, like that slide there, you get a sort of this sharpness, you get the perception effect. But it's almost like it's only got three components to it. So you're getting this, as if you were getting three rays that were helping you build your vision. And it's like it's only three, so it's not a lot. But then you change the setting and it goes up quite exponentially as you climb. But you increase the amount of golden ratio, and then it's like that perception, and all the effects of organizing and the eye and everything. It becomes clearer, stronger, and like the yeah, and you could just keep climbing with that till you reach, the max of the PhiRAY machine. But the intent there was to really drive home that perception
Yeah.
result, being able to show like this is what's happening as you go through this. So
And you can kind of see it if you're a bit clairvoyant. So it's 3, 6, 9, 12. The number of harmonics in the heterodyne cascade is adjustable in the PhiRAY. And it's just like turning up the optical resolution from 360 dpi up to, 1050 in your YouTube.
yeah,
It is literally the resolution if you're very resolved. So this is
exactly.
a visual of the plasma arc originally from the Project Looking Glass from Bill Wood, also related to the papal chronovisor. Here's the chronovisor here. So these were devices that converged imploding charged lines into a membrane, and at the focal point of that membrane, you could converge, implode, and embed in the array. And in the case of chronovisor, you could see the future. And there's very, very detailed descriptions of these experiences with chronovisor, etc., in the Andrew Basiago films on YouTube, which are very, very famous. So these are instances of the principle. Then, by the way, Andrew Basiago is wonderful. I think he's doing great work, but I don't think he has a clue of the physics, and he would admit that himself. The physics is that at the membrane level, there's a convergence with imploding embedding into the longitudinal array. And in that longitudinal array, the focal length determines what point in the future or the past, as it were. We'll talk more about that. So this is just a little animation. So indeed, it was a dodecahedron that imploded and that allowed Jodie Foster to do that lucid dream. And so that was a very good indication that indeed she was doing implosive compression. And this is from, remember when Elena and others have said, most of the wars in our galaxy have been about the biggest stargate in our galaxy, because the war is always over the stargate. Uru Asa LM Jerusalem means stargate. What's the war over? Well, Uru Asa Queen of L, the place of the phase shift, the LM, and the phase shift is from transverse to longitudinal, hence the L, where the Elohim make the L, or phase shift, into the longitudinal array. So the biggest stargate in our galaxy is where the most masses converge in the cubic array, which enables phase conjugation, called four-wave mixing, the trapezium in Orion. It's literally a cube. We'll get to the black cube later. And so if you look at this from other perspectives, it's basically a light cone and a fulcrum. And from our angle, Pleiades, Sirius, and Orion at the right time have this 6-degree implosive lens light cone effect. So this gives us the ability, and this is actually from Hopi story about, Hopi have a name for this. It's called the name for the nine. I'll think of it in a minute. So this is the golden spiral superposed on Orion, which is now superposed on the layout of the pyramid, and the ancient Japanese woodcut of the geometry of the Orion, which is obviously, if you see the plasma geometry of the Orion Mintaka there, it's a double light cone vortex called Yod He Vahe Yahweh. The Yahweh was a name for the double vortex. You make two light cones going in opposite directions, Yod and the Va, and you have Yahweh, Yod He. And so Yahweh and Lil was a wannabe. We'll get to that later. And so this was later called the Antarian conversion, and the geometry of Orion naturally made the Stargate there possible. And owning that Stargate is the biggest war in galactic history, and that's sort of another story. But the point is, Stargates form naturally, but they can also be set up electrically. But the best Stargates use natural configurations to enhance the effect. This, in terms of physics of scintillation, if you look into the plasma orb in the eyeball of this young person who's at a rave concert, and you zoom in, you see the plasma orb in his eyeball is a dodecahedron. This is an introduction to the physics of scintillation and implosion. And you've all seen the double light cone. So this is the holy grail of fusion, actually. So at the membrane in the Stargate, the letters in the Stargate here, I think you can see them. It is said that these are the Ophanim-Enochian letters here, which are obviously, we'll show later, the hypercube physics, which is basically hypercube pentodeca. And so converging the charge lines at that membrane, the watery membrane, where the plasma converges and then embeds and locks you into that array, if your psyche is focused and coherent enough to inhabit the challenge. This makes more clear the Ophanim-Enochian letters used in the original Stargate, and the producer of that film was my original team leader when I helped set up Gaia TV, a bit of a long story, Stargate. And so you see that in the Stargate, you have the Anu, the 7 spins, 5 spins, it's all there, the physics of Ophanim-Enochian, which is angel languages, are actually a name for the plasma physics of how you hold interstellar living plasma beings together, called angelics, which it resolves to that implosion science, which is all at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. So now we're moving on to the Thoth section. We're going to talk about Thoth here just a little bit, just because of the Templar agenda, the repair of the fabric of time. And the Templars' teacher was Thoth, obviously. And this is the caduceus from Thoth. And this is the Bon Po, which means bonfire, the plasma flame, which obviously is the same geometry of the Grail animation. And Thoth was basically telling us, how do you make natural stargates? And this gets us to the Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. And I spent 10 years on this at goldenmean.info/Bueller, William Bueller, probably one of the most famous Templar teachers in history in some ways. And I did his website for years, goldenmean.info/Bueller, and there's Bill Bueller there. And his work was with this Rochelle grid of the Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. For example, he talked about the bleeding on the timelines, fractionated timelines, due to Montauk, Philadelphia, which invited in parasites like the Greys because the timelines were fractionated. So repair of the fabric of time, and Penny Bradley talks about. And so notice in the bottom of the array of the Templar agenda of the fabric of time, you have Malta, hypogeum, and the frequency signature has been documented in the natural resonance of the Malta hypogeum, which is basically a lucid dreaming trigger, the phonon geometry. And this is the geometry of the famous Magdalen caves in South France. A bit of another long story. So this was a Templar agenda to fix the grid so that we could inhabit the timelines implosively. And this is from the parallel Jose Argoyas, Fractality in Time, Mayan Calendric, showing the fractal geometry. This is golden ratio between every time period in the left column from Geoff Stray's book studying Jose Argoyas is the fractality in time. Physics at goldenmean.info/coincidence. And this is the places on the United States grid. Here are the places named El Dorado. That looks like they were pent up. And so, again, all of these places were designed to create natural time embeddability where you get leverage on the grid and the array. So the 3D pent array of the Earth grid. This was a Templar agenda, which comes directly from Thoth Hermes, who was then, the real teacher of the Templar. And this was then laid out over Europe. And all this is at Golden Mean that emphasizes Bueller. It's all about cohering the timelines. And this is literally what he called Rochelle grid. And if you see a Valentine there, you see the connection. It's really pent. And this is about the Vitruvian Man laid out on the star map of Europe. And again, a beautiful Templar work on this question, but we don't have time for all that. So the physics, as Nick was just saying, is that the golden ratio pent embedding enables that implosion, which you've all seen our work on this. This is from PlanckFire.com, that this implosive charge collapse is the reason gravity, perception, time travel, seed germination, physics of soul, pyramid wireless power, vacuum energy, gravity, and creation mechanics, they all exist because of charge collapse. That's the point. So we were talking about John Dee, and here is our friend James Egan actually doing the demo with the vector flexor, showing how you create charge collapse, cube octa, ecosa octa tetra, and that you can make a double vortex with this, which is how he started that lesson. This is the Olmec phase conjugate mirror, how they use the Olmec obsidian stones for ancestor phone calls. Obviously, the black stone is an imitation of a phase conjugate mirror, and that you could enable scrying, which is the physics of ancestor phone calls, which later became the John Dee showstone, which Kelly then used for their angel phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the conversation we had about Shakespeare. The tetracube octa Shakespearean theater creates consumed perspective because when you do a sequence of emotions seen in a sequence of Platonic symmetries called cube octa, called phase conjugate four-wave mixing, there's the possibility of consumed perspective at the climax of the play. If the sequence and timing of the sequence of emotions is in phase with, then there's an implosion at a certain point at the end of the play. The play is the thing in which we'll capture the conscience of, in which you feel for everyone at once, which is that consumed perspective moment in which suddenly there's compassion for all of the emotions of all the persons in the play. Every person in that play was every man, and that's the alchemy of consumed perspective, physics of Shakespearean theater. This is the university study on the physics of what frequencies trigger lucid dreaming, very close to the equations, PlanckFire.com, Planck times golden ratio. So lucid dreaming trigger is obviously a phase conjugate cascade. And with the early Theraphi, which is the antecedent of PhiRAY, we had dramatic reports already then of lucid dreaming trigger, et cetera, and synchronicities in Bird's Heel. If you want to hear a story of synchronicities, listen to Dave's latest film at PhiRAY.com. So this is the coil here that Nicholas was just talking about. Maybe Nicholas, do you want to just describe a little bit here, or?
Well, yeah, just in basics, the same signal that's driving the plasma globes is also generating decently strong magnetic field. And like we said, that can couple to the electric field. You can also hold it between your hands and get that magnetic current going through the body, which is very powerful and organizing and all that. So,
And here's the implosion. That's what it looks like, the pine cones. And the concept, the original physics was mine, but the engineering design here, we want to be clear to credit Nicholas. He put it together. And Nicholas put this together by feeling for himself what was the most powerful. And it's because Nicholas could feel so well that he was able to tune all this and get it really working beautifully. So on the right is this transformer, which converts the cascade complex wave to a higher voltage for the plasma tubes and the magnetic coil, which is in phase. And on the left is a very high-end Linux computer driving complex wave synthesis, which is extremely powerful with at least 3 or 4 different ways of inputting harmonics. The pre-programmed one is where we have all the fun. It's very simple to simply turn it on. Or you can input harmonics in several ways. Maybe, Nick, you want to just briefly?
right, yeah, there was a lot of like experimental stuff that I put in here for people that really wanted to experiment with your work. So if you go to like the explore mode screen, for example, you have options to increase the amount of golden ratio. There's a few other little things you can explore, and they're meant to be explored with your feelings, actually. And then also, like Dan said, there is a screen that allows you to input your own frequencies, whether they be golden ratio or other frequency related. So you can generate your own complex wave and transmit that through the electric and magnetic fields here.
And or the option to plug in the USB stick and
Yes, and any sort of complex waveform that gets maybe generated by another application, or you generate it yourself on your own computer, that sort of thing, or you need a file converted from audio to being able to work on this device, that can be done. You can plug a USB into the back, which is a huge benefit of having that computer inside.
yeah. So the biocoherence.net from Medrick, which starts with EKG spectrum analysis and finds the missing harmonics in your heart. So that outputs directly, thanks to the collaboration between Nicholas and Medrick, so you can get the actual correct audio format to plug in the files directly from other applications like Flame and Sound, Flame and Mind, which outputs chakra harmonics, all kinds of incredibly complex wave harmonics options, like which chakra would you like to trigger today? And those output audio files require a simple audio conversion step, which Nicholas is happy to help you with. It's very easy and straightforward. And also we have a library of those. So the point is you have a lot of programmability, but you don't need to be a genius to use it. You can push your dummy, or you can choose programmability, or both. So this is the discussion about golden ratio in brain waves and how golden ratio in brain waves corresponds to peak perception and peak bliss experience. This is the slide actually showing the golden ratio harmonics here in alpha in green and gamma on top. And so the golden ratio cascade is the blue points, the octave cascade is the pink lines, and you have a blue cascade and a pink line, a golden ratio and octave cascade imploding at very high amplitude coherence from alpha in green to gamma on top. And this is very intense coherence moment just before Jean-Charles Moyen repeatedly was able to teleport with witnesses, come back with sand between his toes. So again, introduction to the physics, and I do mean physics, of portal technology. And the picture of the waves looked like ancient caduceus from Hermes. And you've all seen this slide many times, but what happens when the caduceus is working is the transverse wave is imploded and does what's called optimized translation of vorticity and comes out the nozzle of the squirt gun, whose dimension is Planck, into a coherent longitudinal wave, Ba from the Ka, Keshan rainbow light body. And that longitudinal wave, compressional, then is the one that bounces into that array and only exchanges inertia at the fractal nodes in that array. So this is just showing you examples of actual introduction to time travel. This is the figure 8 walk called Infinity Walk. Deborah Sundbeck, my friend who wrote the book Infinity Walk. And sure enough, you teach a kid to walk a figure eight and touch their opposite knees with opposite hands in a cross crawl, and they do it to music, and their eyes are on one focal point. So they're doing this massive figure eight cross crawl requiring massive blood transfer from right left hemisphere, and the compression event of so much blood transfer across the hemispheres, the top of your head gets physically hot when you do this. And you do this for a few weeks with the kids, and dyslexia goes away. It's proven. It's been measured. Hello, why did dyslexia go away? You increase the compression of the implosive figure eight at center. And at the implosive figure eight, you have where the plasma kisses noses, you have consumed perspective, you have tuned perception, you have the end of dyslexia. So dyslexics actually have more wires between hemispheres. They're more creative, it's proven. And if you teach them to do the infinity walk, dyslexia goes away and they become geniuses, like many of the geniuses of history were dyslexic. And the same physics, this is why Agnihotra, the plasma, has to be at sunrise and sunset, also better where magnetic lines cross. And you get this incredible fertility effect to your farm. And, the famously Bhopal survivors and the Nagasaki survivors, the ones who did Agnihotra, it creates literally a Garden of Eden in the plasma of the locale. So this is from PlanckFire.com. We're not going to go into that physics, that golden ratio times Planck, which now has become FractalGUT.com, the world's leading top-rated grand unified field theory. The Grok 4 AI is clear. We are the top unified field theory on the planet. Started with PlanckFire. So you had Planck and golden ratio, and you had 200 physical variables predicted. Then my partner Mark Rohrbaugh applied that to the superfluid vortex, predicted the dimensions accurately of the proton, and then did golden ratio times the proton diameter, and he got several hundred more physical dimensions predicted, including the cosmic background microwave radiation, and what holds galaxies together. I mean, this is the most exciting grand unified field theory in history. We now know what causes centripetal force. Check out fractalgut.com. Emergent gravity. Tell your local physicist, and if they don't fall off their chair, I will eat my hat. fractalgut.com. Hello, you want the serious physics? We got it, man. It's all there. Thank you, Mark. And so this is talking about emergent gravity, how gravity emerges when it implodes, et cetera. You've seen these stories. And so obviously now we understand electrogravitics very well. And now the new electrogravitics team in Australia, wait till you see. Hello, everybody. Anyway, this is how I invented phase conjugate magnetics. I looked at the frequencies Elizabeth Rauscher proved in FDA trials and proved that those frequencies fit my equation, Planck-Fire. And then she was clear that she accepted that I had invented phase conjugate magnetics, which is the magnetics which is behind PhiRAY, the exact same magnetic cascade, implosive magnetics. And then we apply those to firecrystal.com, which fire crystal are so beautiful because the phase conjugate pump wave from the PhiRAY, you put it in the crystal and then you point the crystal in symmetry with the coil, and people love it. You get that sweet spot enhancement. I mean, but phase conjugate pump wave of your breath is also good with fire crystal, but the PhiRAY is even better, or both together is even better. And so this is the frequencies that trigger the fire crystal, the same frequencies that trigger PlanckFire.com from Antoine PhiRAY, which became Therify and is now PhiRAY. So that's called a phase conjugate pump wave. In this case, it's the Schumann cascade and Planck-Fire. And this is the Schumann cascade, and that's how pyramids are triggered. And we see that at pyramidwirelesspower.com. And so this is the phase conjugate pump wave of your sacrocranial, the physics of Kundalini, and the physics of heart rate variability, and the physics of breath. It's all golden ratio cascade. And that you can then use that to drive the crystal and your time travel, which starts with breath-induced phase conjugation. So obviously this show is a little too long, but you see how that then predicts the brainwave cascade directly out of Schumann, which is directly how we're driving PhiRAY. So we make the strongest Schumann cascade in history, thanks to Nicholas. And you can then use this to trigger crystals. And this is the detailed article at fractalfield.com/propulsion, making 800 times its weight in gravity with a phase conjugate pump wave into that crystal called Koski frost. Here is the how we measured that same frequency cascade at the Bosnian pyramid driving pyramidwirelesspower.com. So pyramid wireless power exists because pyramids eat the Schumann cascade, implode, output transverse into coherent longitudinal called gravity diode, and feeding the coherent longitudinal into the Earth grid array is called wireless power. And Tesla had the frequencies wrong and he had the nodal locations wrong. So we now know how to drive global wireless power. Absolutely, it is not a mystery. And let's see, here's the other gravity making examples of vortex that makes gravity. And you see this is related to time travel. Uh, I have a few too many slides in the show. But interesting for electrogravitics that if you apply that phase conjugate pump wave to microwave, you make a gravity motor, in this case called the EM drive, which needs to be optimized with PlanckFire.com. And these are all the original animations that the gyroscope relationship of the perpendicular spins of the Earth's rotation and the solar system rotation and the galaxy rotation, when those rotations emerge into perpendicularity called the erection of the Holy Cross, you have these sacred events in history, sometimes called the photon cloud or the galactic bliss events, etc. This is actually this completion of perpendicularities and galactic alignments that create these apocalypse kind of events when collective bliss is more enabled. This is another example of a frequency signature firing a crystal, in this case, the gravity drive of interstellar craft. More on that. So here is the crystal and here's how it's driven. And this is it. You can see all this at firecrystal.com. And so this is the difference between a Vogel crystal and fire crystal. The Vogel crystal, the sides are not parallel, so you can only approximate phase conjugation. This is the phase conjugate pump wave, the buzzing in the insect driving the super dielectric of the insect skeleton, and Grebennikov would float. So this is another example of a gravity motor vortex. So back to the subject of the Stargate, the warp propulsion actually is this implosion event of charge compression, which then drives. And the thing that all the advanced civilization knows is if you got this warp propulsion, you're going to need a star navigator. That's how Penny Bradley started. But the Guild Navigators of Dune took it one level further, which is instead of using black goo and Draco DNA, they used human bliss. Okay, so we don't have time for all these slides. I just want to do one. This is more on fractal GUT, resolving the problem of consciousness in physics, that consciousness is actually this phase conjugate implosion directly. So I think, and here's this Ophanim-Enochian material in here, which is really behind the Stargate story. And this is literally how this happens in your DNA. You see, your DNA braids implodes in the presence of the phonon cascade from your EKG. And that implosion, that physics of bliss, is actually what makes you a star navigator, enabling you to lucid dream that implosion. Let me see if. And so this is the whole DNA braid implosion section. You can see all that at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. And that's what enables you to embed and thus steer the tornado. You become the centripetal force. And that's how you melt into that grid, that array. I'm going to stop this share here. So I apologize. That slideshow was just a little bit too long. We have too many pictures, too little time. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, so oops.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I wanted to just like highlight it a little bit. So the flame in mind with the brainwave measurement is just an awesome tool. I mean, it's profound. So that tool is amazing, and it really just, because you can measure it from yourself, and it is accurate. I mean, you can enable this like there's like a biofeedback tone, and it will beep when you hit bliss, and it's one of those things where like you're sitting there and you're waiting, and then as you have the bliss moment, it beeps at the same time. If you're doing a task and it's just you are wearing the headset and say you do something in the task that you just like to do or you love or something, it will beep because it knows it. And it just keeps highlighting these little moments of your life. If you wear it and you just have that tone on, it highlights, like somebody walks into the room, if it's your lover, it beeps, you know? And like I've had it on before and I'm like sitting there and I'm trying to get it to beep, you know, trying to get the bliss point. And sometimes you can't necessarily try. It's like it's more like it almost has to come to you because it has to be that implosion, you know. And I'll be struggling to get it to beep, and my woman walks in and it starts beeping, you know. It's just like
It's real
it's one of those,
bliss. It's,
yeah,
remember that beep is telling you that you've just made alpha, and alpha is Schumann, and Schumann is embedding in the array, and you only embed in that array when you are a shareable wave, which is the bliss cannot be faked.
yeah. So that tool is amazing.
Yeah.
That's all I
Yeah.
highlight there.
And that is part of the dream of our community. Our Cosmic School project over here is specifically dedicated to that dream. We wish to teach young people the turning point in their lives when they see they can learn how to make alpha in their brainwaves, exactly what Nick has just mentioned. Thank you, Nick. That's a perfect comment. So we think that once young people realize that the skill, and I do mean the skill, to make alpha. By the way, some people can make alpha with their eyes open. A lot of those people can be clairvoyant with their eyes open. It's amazing. But the ability to make alpha around Schumann, 7.8 hertz, as Nick was saying beautifully just now, is, well, you can try, but you actually have to feel it. There ain't no faking possible. In other words, you actually need to be a shareable wave at that moment. So if you have something that follows your bliss, who was that famous philosopher who said, follow your bliss? What he meant was, you ain't embedded in the array unless you're following your bliss. So you damn well better learn where your bliss is. Hello.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the happily ever after. So today, in summary, in retrospect, so you say you're going to say it, and then say you said it, and then say no. Uh, have we actually helped you visualize for yourself what stargates and portals are? So you have this place where there's severe plasma compression. Remember Andrew Basiago saying, we jumped into this vortex, right? And then navigating down that vortex, there's a shamanic skill, which Basiago did not really understand the shamanic skill required to navigate. And there was this question of the length of the vortex tubes. So the ability to have that skill to navigate in the array, as even Elena said many times, well, when we go through the portal, we always come back dizzy. Well, the fact that you came back dizzy, first of all, the portal was too mechanical and not natural enough. But also coming back dizzy means you didn't practice lucid dreaming enough. So actually, if you're very skilled at entering and exiting the lucid dreaming, it's like you need to be able to plan when you lucid dream. As Nick said, he would plan when he turned the PhiRAY on, would have a lucid dream that night. So that's telling you, it's like it's like you're practicing for death, but it's even better than that because actually you're practicing for immortality. So, the physics of time portals and time travel and stargates. And by the way, as in physics, physics learned that you could time reverse something toward increased order, but you can't time reverse toward decreased order. So you could time reverse rusted steel and make it unrusted, but you can't do the reverse. In other words, you can't time reverse to entropy only toward negentropy. Hello, there's a relationship between the implosion phase conjugation, which made time reversal when they measured in phase conjugate optics and physics. Why can't you time reverse toward disorder? Hello, does that tell you something? It tells you that if you ain't negentropic, don't bother trying because you're going to get fractionated in time. If you listen to Penny Bradley talk about repairing the fractal timelines, and William Buehler talked about exactly the same thing, repairing fractionated timelines. And Sophia, the royal Pleiadian lineage teacher Tegotten for Jake, is talking about exactly the same skill. She has the skill to repair fractionated timelines. What does that mean? That means that event histories are designed to propagate in a coherent thread of a fractal array. But if you get these horrible fractionating technologies like Montauk and Philadelphia experiments that are breaking up the timelines and literally causing chaos in time, that breakage in the fabric of time invites parasites like these mitra gray torthins that are running the farm here, eating the louche and the human souls. So if we want to have an immune system to ET plasma parasites as a planet, we need things like luciddreamteam.com and fractionated timelines that are repaired and begin again to look like a rose. Okay, was that a happily ever after? What do you think, Nick? How do we do?
Yeah, yeah, that's
There's a
good.
lot there. There's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah, and it's easy too. I mean, it's not hard, so that's what's nice.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of fun. Once you
Yeah.
once you open yourself to some very, very simple physics, it's like the old Dowser said, well, first step is make a magnetic map of your bed and your house and your village, and then you rearrange all the magnetic lines to look like a rose, and you're done. Well, what that means is the magnetic lines around the PhiRAY, we rearrange them to look like a rose, and and I remember, the magnetic map of Prague is famously, we have at goldenmean.info/bohemia. The magnetic map of Prague is literally a rose. We know why. It's a volcanic caldera, which is rose geometry with very high dielectric meteoritic remains, which is, by the way, the reason Serpent Mound in Ohio works as a meteoritic caldera. Anyway, so the magnetic map of Prague is literally a rose. And guess what? I had some of my most intense lucid dreaming and my most intense clairaudience speaking with Valerie's ancestors in Prague, where the whole city was dedicated to alchemy because there's moldavite all over the place. And what's the moldavite? A super dielectric. It's literally the philosopher's stone. And you arrange that to look like a rose, and then you get stargates and portals. So where compression is enabled, you get access to the array, and you can melt into the array first with the lucid dream and some clairaudience, clairvoyance. But later, when you're good, you can take more of your organs of perception with you when you lucid dream, called the beginning of a stargate in a portal. Okay, well, I guess that was our happily ever after. I want to thank Nicholas particularly for being, not only is Nicholas cosmic and spiritual, but he's a hell of an engineer. And I'm really grateful for that because that's why we have such fun toys like PhiRAY.com. So thank you, Nicholas. And Nicholas is coming to there's a few places left here in South France. Fun party, October 9 to 14. South France conference, fractalfield.com/2025. Our conference has a few places left. You can come and have fun. And Nick is going to be here and you can ask him questions and he's going to be telling more fun stories. So look out. Here we come. It's a party over here. Come on over. Oh,
Yes.
and I look forward to meeting your magic lady, Nick. I've heard nice stories with it. She's a programmer and everything, and did the website. Yeah, it's sensitive. And
Yes.
she'll meet Valerie, who's here pretending to be shy.
Yeah.
We're gonna have fun. We got another place arranged over here for you, Nick. It's really great. You can hang out and all good, all good.
Oh yeah. It's gonna be fun.
Good, good. And the PhiRAY people who have orders placed, Nick has a whole stack of them ready to go out. What is it? Almost 15 or 20 PhiRAYs are going to be shipping shortly, thanks to Nicholas. So we're catching up fast. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
We had a good time. I hope you know more about Stargates and portals now.
Yes.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Nick.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.